You know, the more and more time goes on, the more I'm really beginning to think that the last truly great year for cinema was 2019. Seriously, it's like that meme of, oh, me leaving 2019 versus me entering 2020 whatever. Like, it's really not getting better. It's just really not. Hey everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. So, we've finally come to the end of 2025, and I have to be honest with all of you, this has been an incredibly disappointing year, cinematically. At least for me. I mean, from a personal standpoint, 2025 has actually been a pretty decent year for me. Many of you might remember that in my top 10 video for 2024, I had referenced that I had dealt with a lot of personal problems the last few years, and this year actually represented a lot of positive changes for me. And even though things aren't exactly the way I want them to be, I am overall happy with the direction I'm going in life currently. And even though this channel has not grown as much as I hoped it would, I am very grateful for the people who have chosen to subscribe and the people who've chosen to listen to my videos over and over and over again, talking about movies that no one really cares about. Of course, that being said, it also feels like pretty much every other channel on YouTube has spent the year talking about movies that no one really cares about, because 2025 has been an absolutely awful year for film. Like, I'm truly shocked by the poor output of films this year from both mainstream Hollywood and the indie scene, especially compared to last year, because even though last year wasn't amazing, it was a surprisingly good year for movies compared to what we've gotten since the COVID pandemic ended. But just looking at everything that we've gotten this year, I feel like I've had to spend the entire year actively looking for good movies. Which obviously in the grand scheme of things is not that big of a deal, but it can get pretty sad when you look around and you legitimately can't find any good entertainment. So with that all in mind, let's actually take the time to celebrate what I consider to be the top 10 best films of 2025. Now before we begin, I do have a few disclaimers up front. Disclaimer number 1, despite what the focus of my channel is, this list will not be solely comprised of obscure movies that nobody heard about. There will be a decent number of studio releases on this list, because even though in my opinion the major studios were severely lacking this year, there were a few select releases that I do think are worth praising. Disclaimer number 2, I haven't gone out to see every single movie this year, because quite frankly, there were a lot of movies that came out this year that I just was not interested in seeing. Movies like Karate Kid 6, Jurassic Park 7, Mission Impossible 8, or Fisting Fireman 9. Okay, that last one's a South Park joke, but just a bunch of derivative bullshit released for major franchise tentpoles, which really just represent the lowest common denominator for studios in terms of just pandering and digging up old IP to regurgitate something that's just nothing. Just absolutely nothing. And while I did certainly see a few films this year that fit that criteria, overall, if I knew I wasn't going to enjoy a movie, I didn't go out to watch it. So, that's that. Of course, that being said, it could be the case that somewhere down the line I end up watching a movie that I missed this year, realize that it is good, and then just slot it into my top 10. And that leads me to disclaimer number 3, being that this list is subject to change. Like I said, somewhere down the line I could watch a film that I missed this year and slot it into my list, but I could also go out and rewatch any of the films that I already put on this list and decide that they're better or worse depending on what I discover during my rewatch. So with that all in mind, I will leave a description to my letterbox in the description below, in case you want to actually see how my rankings change in real time. You know, if you care. Oh, and one more disclaimer before we get into this. Almost every single film on my top 10 list of this year is a horror movie. And that is because, in my opinion, horror is the most creative genre of film that exists. Because even though there's a million shitty horror movies that exist, they're at least always creative and entertaining. And the ones that actually bother to try actually turn out to be pretty damn good. So with that in mind, let's get into it, because it's going to be horror all the way down, for the most part. Obviously, this is all going to be based on my personal opinion and preferences, not an objective appraisal of each film's individual quality, yada 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 yada. First up, at number 10, a classic story that you'd think that people would get tired of by now, but no one, including me, has. We have Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein.
I beg your pardon? It's pronounced Frankenstein.
Now, at time of recording, Frankenstein as a concept has been adapted almost 1,000 times. That's not an exaggeration. It's a classic story. The original Mary Shelley novel is one of the most influential pieces of literature ever written, and the earliest known adaptation of this source material into cinema was the Thomas Edison version from 1910. And you would think that 115 years later, audiences would get tired of watching the walking man-made monster contemplate and reconcile the unnatural state of his own existence. But no, many people, myself included, have been completely blown away by Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of the material, just based on how earnest and emotional it is. Now, obviously, I am biased towards this film, because as I've mentioned in previous videos, I'm a huge fan of Frankenstein. I read the original novel when I was in grade school. I've seen many of the adaptations, and I adore them, including ones that are not broadly considered to be good, like Aaron Eckhart's I, Frankenstein. And despite this movie being a Netflix release, I actually went out of my way to see it in theaters at the Egyptian in Hollywood with my friends Anthony and Ernesto, who I've previously recorded videos with on the Boondock Saints and Tron Legacy respectively. But honestly, when I initially sat down to watch this movie in theaters, I didn't think I would like it, because the cold open in the Arctic, I didn't enjoy it. It felt too action-oriented for me, and like it was just meant to sort of trick the viewer into thinking that this would be a story that it wasn't. And yes, the Arctic prologue is accurate to the book, but to me, it just felt like a tonal disconnect from the rest of the film. That being said, as the rest of the film went on, I slowly garnered a deep respect, appreciation, and enjoyment of the material as it was being presented to me. And something I think makes this adaptation so good is the fact that Guillermo del Toro wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel when making this movie. This is meant to be just a straight one-for-one adaptation of the original Mary Shelley novel. And even though he does make some minor changes, the core aspects of the story are still presented as accurately as possible. Like the various themes of life, death, and parenthood, the incredible emotional burdens that the various characters carry with them throughout the narrative, even the incredibly dense dialogue is meant to emulate the deliberately complex writing of the original novel, because obviously Mary Shelley, as a female author, was trying to prove that as a woman she should be respected as a writer. But yeah, what else can be said? Frankenstein is a great movie, with also great performances across the board, whether it be from David Bradley, or Christoph Waltz, or Mia Goth, or Oscar Isaac, or the creature himself, Jacob Elordi. Everyone is just bringing their A-game to this material, and they all feel like fully fleshed out three-dimensional characters. And watching this movie just really reminded me why I'm such a big fan of Frankenstein to begin with, and just leaves me excited to see the next two Frankenstein movies that are coming up in the following year, being The Bride, and apparently Frankenstein in Romania. I guess. Next up, at number 9, we have the most beautifully disgusting movie of the year, being The Toxic Avenger. Now, obviously, I already did a review of The Toxic Avenger earlier this year, so if you want to hear my complete thoughts, you could watch that video. And yes, this is a shameless plug. But if you want the TLDR, basically, to me, this movie was just a perfect revisit to an era of filmmaking where no one really gave a and it was just about making something that was cool and fun. The remake of The Toxic Avenger perfectly fits into the mold of the classic trauma films of the 80s and 90s, but in addition to fitting that mold, also delivers the viewer a surprisingly earnest and emotional father-son story, which I found myself emotionally moved by. And I enjoyed The Toxic Avenger so much that it became one of the only 5 movies that I physically bought this year. Because even though it's not the best film of the year, it's certainly the movie I had the most fun with. So go check it out. Next up, at number 8, we have one of the most unique and creative horror movies that I've seen in years. Good Boy. Some of you might have heard of Good Boy, But for those of you who haven't, this is a movie that takes place entirely from the perspective of a dog. The main character of this movie is a dog named Indy, and this movie is live action, and it does feature human characters that you can hear speaking in the background, but almost every single shot and scene is framed from the dog's third person or sometimes even first person point of view. Now, my best friend Connor, who I did my Pumpkinhead review with, is the one who told me about this movie, and he convinced me to see it with him in theaters. And when he told me what the movie's selling point was, I immediately rolled my eyes and thought to myself, oh, this is going to be a gimmicky concept. But just goes to show you that even I can underestimate horror sometimes. Because this isn't just a movie that's trying to sell itself based on a gimmicky concept of, oh, well, the dog is the main character. This is a film that actually utilizes its central concept, taking its central framing and using it to make the audience feel as uncomfortable and vulnerable as possible. Because the movie doesn't just frame itself from the dog's POV for shits and giggles, it does that to invest the viewer in the perspective of a defenseless animal who is borderline powerless when it comes to protecting his master, as his master becomes slowly beholden to these horrific forces that are just out of anybody's control. This film is just painfully uncomfortable in the best way. And even though it would have been super easy to just put the dog in danger to garner emotional sympathy from the viewer, because obviously people love dogs, the movie doesn't do that. The movie does obviously put the dog in frightening situations, but nothing done to the dog in this movie ever feels like it's done for shock value, and it never crosses the line of potential animal abuse. The technical aspects of this film are also pretty great. Obviously, the movie does a great job establishing mood and atmosphere as a horror film, but the cinematography of the movie genuinely really impressed me, because almost every single shot is at, like, the eye level of a dog. Most of the shots are just very low to the floor, and the shots are composed deliberately to cut off the heads of most of the human characters, or leave their faces obscured, because this is supposed to be the perspective of a dog. And when it comes to the main character being the dog Indy, who is actually the director Ben Leonberg's dog, he just is so unbelievably well trained. And it really shocked me to see all the things that he does in this movie. Like, this is genuinely the best dog performance that I've seen since, like, The Mask with Jim Carrey. But yeah, Good Boy is just terrifying, tragic, and heart-wrenching. And I loved every minute of it. So, go check it out. Next up at number 7, a film that I actually regret missing in theaters this year, Woman in the Yard. Now, this movie was incredibly well advertised early in the year, and with my desperate search for anything good, I was kind of shocked that I missed it during its theatrical run. And I really don't know why I missed it. Maybe I was just busy, maybe the trailer didn't make the movie look interesting to me, because I do remember seeing the trailer for this movie when it was coming out, but maybe it just didn't grab me. But getting around to finally watching it, I was honestly a little blown away. Because this is a pretty smart horror movie. Like, Woman in the Yard isn't particularly unique. Like, if I was going to compare it to any other contemporary horror film, I'd say that it shares a lot of similarities with, like, The Babadook, which is obviously a horror film that was very widely praised when it came out due to how it handled its central allegory of grief, and how The Babadook was meant to be a representation of grief. Woman in the Yard fiddles around with a very similar concept, where the title character, being the woman in the yard, is meant to be an allegory for a specific concept, which I will not spoil. And while this specific allegory is incredibly easy to read, and doesn't really have a lot of nuance in terms of relating to the film's central theme, that does not make it any less effective. As this film is just incredibly well executed, not just from a thematic standpoint, but from a narrative standpoint, as the film fully utilizes its both flawed and damaged characters, as well as its singular location, to build an immense level of suspense in the narrative. Because at the end of the day, the central concept of the movie is that you have a family being tormented by an otherworldly being, and that family is comprised of 2 children, a mom with a broken leg, and a dead father. And that setup within itself is just ripe for horror. And something else I really love about the film, and to be fair, this is more of an aesthetic quality that doesn't tie too heavily into the narrative, but is notable enough for me to mention. It's the fact that this movie has an entirely black cast, and doesn't make a big deal out of that at all. Like I've mentioned this before, there's plenty of great films that tackle race as a subject matter, and employ very expert commentary while still telling compelling emotional stories. But every now and then, it can get exhausting if every single movie you see with black people is just about how hard it is to be black. But something I love about Woman in the Yard is that it just doesn't make a big deal out of it. And while there are aspects of black culture that tie into the main characters, like the fact that the mother Ramona is a stunted artist, for the most part, this is a story that feels like it could just happen to any family of any race. And the central theme would be maintained. So yeah, go see Woman in the Yard. Like I said, it's a really easy film to figure out, but that doesn't mean I enjoyed it any less. And I really found its central theme to be emotionally effective and not preachy. And something that I think a lot of people could relate to. Next up, at number 6, we have a movie that I did not want to watch, a movie that I thought would be bad, but a movie that ended up being one of my favorite films of the year. The latest film from Yorgos Lanthimos, Begonia. Now, before we get into Begonia, I feel like I really need to stress the fact that I am not a fan of Yorgos Lanthimos. I have nothing against the guy personally. In fact, I actually kind of respect him based on the fact that he's able to consistently convince Emma Stone to do very graphic nude and sex scenes. But I am just not a fan of his filmmaking style at all. I've seen most of his movies, and quite frankly, I find his films to be gratuitous, overly indulgent, and overly reliant on shock value. And something that really bothers me about every film I've seen from him is the fact that for some reason, he insists on directing his actors to deliver the most stilted and stunted, emotionally vacuous, awkward dialogue you can think of. Like seriously, it's just so weird because he regularly gets incredibly talented actors to be in his films. But for some reason, they always give the most emotionally bland performances you can think of. And I have no idea why. I can only imagine that's done for comedic effect, or maybe it's done to emphasize the more shocking attributes of his films, but it doesn't make the movies better. It just makes them boring. And he does that with his actors in like every single film, whether it be Dogtooth, or The Lobster, or Kinds of Kindness, or even a good movie like Poor Things. The dialogue delivery is always stunted and emotionless. Like, the only actor I can think of in any of his films leading up to now that actually feels like he puts effort and emotion into his line reads is Mark Ruffalo in Poor Things. And even then, he has the worst character in that movie. But yeah, with that all in mind, I was not excited to see Begonia. In fact, I remember when I first saw the trailer for the movie, I just thought to myself, oh, great, another Yorgos Lanthimos softcore. This time, with Emma Stone getting kidnapped and gang by 2 white hicks. And I said as much walking into the theater to see this movie with a few of my friends. I said to them, okay, let's check out the latest from Yorgos Lanthimos, and I am pleasantly surprised to say that I ate my words. Because I love Begonia. This is probably the best film that I've seen from Yorgos Lanthimos. And I don't know what it is, but for once, his directing style doesn't feel awkward to me. It feels like the performances in this movie aren't meant to be lifeless. They're meant to be technical. Which makes sense in context, because in this situation, all the characters are trying to maintain as much composure as possible, which actually makes the shocking scenes in the film carry more impact without feeling like they're done for shock value. And as a side note, something I absolutely found hilarious about this movie is the fact that the 2 male characters in this movie, being played by Jesse Plemons and Aidan Delbus, have both been chemically castrated. So in context of the narrative, they cannot be attracted to Emma Stone. That, right there, feels like Yorgos Lanthimos was looking directly at me in the audience and said, ha ha, you, no one's going to be horny for Emma Stone in this movie, so you don't get to criticize me this time. Like, seriously, I loved that. It honestly felt like he was just directly responding to critics like me. But this movie is just so good, it constantly keeps you on your toes, it has a lot to say about the follies of conspiracy culture, because the movie really does great work to highlight how people in terrible life situations will look for any reason to explain why their lives are so terrible, regardless of how devoid of logic those reasons are. And they say as much in the movie. Like, there's a meal scene in the second act of the movie where Emma Stone points out to Jesse Plemons how he's sort of been ideologically indoctrinated, how he's trapped in an echo chamber, and he goes out and he says, no, I'm past all of that. Like, I went down every single rabbit hole. I went down alt-right, alt-light, Marxist, leftist. I basically went to the store and bought out the whole place. And he says that as a justification for the completely insane worldview that he holds now that justified him kidnapping Emma Stone to begin with. And I loved how well emphasized that scene was, because it illustrates perfectly how no matter how much thought you think you put into things, or how many conclusions that you try to logic yourself through, you can still become victim to your own mental gymnastics, just looking for any explanation that makes sense. But Begonia was just such an incredible movie. The performances were obviously great. Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons kill it as always, but I was also pleasantly surprised to see the performance from Aidan Delbus, who throughout the movie just kind of gets led along on Jesse Plemons' master plan, and he's not entirely bought into what Jesse Plemons is doing, but because they're cousins, and because he loves his cousin, Aidan Delbus' character is just going along with it, even though he's slowly questioning things more and more as they go. And I was really impressed with Delbus' performance, considering that this was his first time acting in a feature film, and also considering the fact that he is an autistic actor. Like, casting him was just an enormous risk that Lanthimos took, and I really respect that, because Aidan Delbus is really the heart of this film. His performance feels genuinely authentic, even though it can be awkward at times. And it's just so encouraging to see someone with a condition like mine get a shot at the big time like this. So bravo to Aidan Delbus, you killed it in this movie. If I was going to have one complaint about Begonia though, it would be the ending. And it's not because the ending is bad, it's not. But watching the movie, the central premise is that Jesse Plemons kidnapped Emma Stone because he thinks that she's an alien. So right then and there, you know that the movie's going to end with either the reveal that she is an alien or that she's not. And I'm not going to spoil which one they chose, but I knew this while watching the movie. I knew that no matter what decision they made, I would be disappointed by it. Because when you're taking in a story like this, your mind becomes locked in that binary, and you're left expecting both outcomes. So no matter which outcome you get, you're going to be equally underwhelmed. The exact same thing happened to me when I watched The Invisible Man back in 2020, and I knew that the way that they'd explain The Invisible Man would either be through magic or technology. Like, I knew I'd just be disappointed no matter what the explanation was, because I equally expected both. But that's not that movie's fault, and me getting locked into the mindset of is Emma Stone an alien or not is not the fault of Begonia either. And I really can't fault Lanthimos or the film's writer, Will Tracy, for not coming up with an alternative to this binary, because I can't even think of one. Like, if you had a third outcome in this movie, it would have to be an outcome that blended together aspects of both potential outcomes. And doing that would risk you completely ruining the film, because you'd undermine the theme one way or another. So in that sense, my complaint is basically a nitpick. But regardless of my complaints about the ending of the film, I still think it's beautifully executed, and perfectly fits Lanthimos' style in the best way possible. So yeah, bravo Yorgos Lanthimos. You made me eat your words, and I will sit here patiently awaiting your next Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons collaboration. Maybe throw in Willem Dafoe in there, just for good measure. Get the trifecta together. Anyway, next up at number 5, and we're halfway there, so stay with me. We have a spy thriller that feels like it'd be more at home in 2005 than in 2025. But I really can't complain, because Black Bag was just an incredibly engaging film. Funny thing, I was actually kind of reluctant to watch this movie, because despite it having a great director like Steven Soderbergh, and great cast members like Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender, I was just kind of worn out on thrillers. Like, they just feel incredibly played out to me and kind of boring. And also, the last thriller that I watched before Black Bag was The Killer, directed by David Fincher, and that movie also starred Michael Fassbender. I watched it like a week or two before I watched Black Bag, and I was just completely underwhelmed. Like, I was very disappointed. I thought while the film was well casted, it was incredibly generic, it didn't do anything special. The first 20 minutes of the movie is all narration, and that really annoyed me. Like, it feels like you could have made the first 20 minutes of the movie just silent, and that would have been more engaging. And I honestly don't know if that was just a decision Fincher made, or if that was something that Netflix pushed for. But I was just very unimpressed by The Killer, and the only reason I checked it out is because people said it was one of the best films of 2023, and I'm sorry, I have to disagree. So with that in my mind at that point, I was kind of reluctant to watch Black Bag, which was another movie starring Michael Fassbender, who admittedly is one of the greatest actors of his generation. But I was like, do I want to watch another Michael Fassbender thriller? I don't know. But I sat down, I watched Black Bag, and I was blown away. Because not only is this movie well directed and well acted, but it's also just so well thought out and mature, but it's not stuck up or stoic, which is nice. Like, the staging in this film feels very deliberate and purposeful. Like, for instance, there's a scene early on where you have, like, 3 couples sitting together at a table, and the way the 6 of them are arranged, it goes man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. But the only couple facing each other are the main couple of Cate Blanchett and Michael Fassbender. The other 2 couples are sitting side by side. And that kind of staging, while subtle, also just communicates a lot about the narrative and the characters. Like, the fact that the main couple are sitting across from each other communicates intimacy since they can look into each other's eyes, yet at the same time it also communicates the distance between them since the central plot of the movie revolves around a fear that one has betrayed the other, or more accurately, one has betrayed the country. Meanwhile, the other 2 sets of couples sitting side by side, while they are close, the fact that they don't have that same level of intimacy looking into each other's eyes actually does an even better job of communicating the lack of intimacy between them individually. And not only that, but they also replicate that exact staging in the climax of the movie when Blanchett and Fassbender confront the 4 of them. So yeah, I just really respected the way this film was thought out. Not only that though, but despite this film being a more mature, adult-oriented narrative, it's also not boring. Like, the characters have a lot of life to them. You can tell that even though they're meant to maintain a sense of professionalism, not all of them exactly do. Like, the characters swear and they talk about sex, but it never feels gratuitous. It feels like these are just who they are, and they're just doing their best to live normal lives despite the fact that they work in espionage. And I think the fact that the movie does have that bit of an edge also contributes to a sense of humor, like a very subtle sense of humor, that really helps dig this film out of dreariness. Like, the lie detector scene really comes to mind when discussing how effective this film is at both character and plot. Just a very tense exchange between characters with a little bit of levity thrown in. Just a little bit of irreverence. Just a sprinkle. But yeah, Black Bag was just a really pleasant surprise for me, and before anyone asks, yes, I will be putting my copy right next to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, because, I mean, it's obvious. Next up, at number 4, we have probably one of the best regarded horror films of the year, Weapons. Now, I feel like everyone broadly knows what Weapons is supposed to be about, even if they didn't see it, because this film was advertised really well. Basic premise, you have 17 kids who all run out of their house in the middle of the night and disappear. No one knows what happened to them, no one knows why they left, so the entire town is just left in turmoil and fear, trying to wonder what happened. Did they all get abducted? Did they all have a plan? Were they unhappy? Did the parents do something wrong? No one knows. It's a very interesting premise, and I remember when I first saw the teaser for it, I immediately thought to myself, is this like the Pied Piper of Hamelin? Is that the situation? Where they just lured away by, like, magic? Well, we'll get into that. But I was genuinely really impressed, with this movie. And obviously this is the second horror film from director Zach Cregger, who obviously made Barbarian a few years ago. And with this film, I just feel like he's really gone on to show that he is the next up-and-coming big horror director in this industry. And the fact that this movie is also an anthology film was enough to get me to buy it on Blu-ray. I'm a sucker for anthology films. I just love seeing the way everything ties together from story to story. And I feel like this movie did it really well. That being said, if I was going to make a critique of this movie, I do think that the reveal of the antagonist happens a bit too early. Like, the antagonist is alluded to throughout the movie, and to be fair, the way the antagonist is alluded to and foreshadowed in the movie doesn't necessarily make sense, given the context of the narrative, but it works well to build the suspense of the story. But when the antagonist is more or less properly introduced in part 5 of the film, I feel like the movie went a bit too far with that reveal. If I was going to restructure the movie, I would have had the antagonist be introduced in part 5, but I wouldn't have had their abilities properly expanded upon until part 6. Because part 6 of this film really is the big expositional part that sort of ties everything together. And I feel like what they did in part 5 was just kind of shooting their load too early. But that's a minor complaint in the grand scheme of things. I think Weapons is still a great movie, and it is a fine addition in my horror collection. Which is great. Next up, at number 3, we're going to forget about Weapons. And we're going to talk about a film that is also a creative sort of reinvention of horror that was sort of unfairly overlooked. That movie being Strange Harvest. Now, like I said, I've been actively looking for good movies all year, and it's kind of shocking to me that this movie actually flew under my radar. This is a film that came out the same weekend as Weapons, and much like Weapons, it does play around with some occult concepts, and also has the central symbolism of a triangle tying together sort of narrative points in the film. But obviously, being released the same weekend, one is always going to overshadow the other. So it's not shocking that Strange Harvest was left by the wayside. But what shocks me is that I didn't know about it when it came out. Like, normally I'm pretty good at keeping tabs on smaller movies, even when they're released at the same time as larger movies. When it comes to Strange Harvest, though, I didn't hear about it at all. In fact, the person that turned me onto this movie was the film's star, Peter Zizzo. I'd worked with Peter on a project earlier this year, and I remember during lunch on set one day, him and I were sitting down talking about all the films that had come out this year so far, and he recommended Strange Harvest to me. He told me that the movie came out the same weekend as Weapons, and he told me that the movie was actually better than Weapons. And I'll be completely honest, going into watching this movie, I was a bit skeptical of his claim. Not because I didn't think the movie would be good, but because, obviously, he's the star of the film, so obviously he would sell it. But as soon as I got into the movie, I was engaged immediately, and as soon as they got to that hospital scene, halfway through the film, I was locked in, and I was like, oh yeah, this movie is great. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming that would be most of you, Strange Harvest is a true crime mockumentary. The way the film frames itself, it tells the events of a serial killer who was active over a 20-ish year period. The film spends its entire runtime trying to convince you that everything that you're watching is real, and it does a superb job doing that, because not only do all the actors give authentic performances, earnestly convincing you that they are real people, but the film's cinematography is also incredibly consistent with a true crime documentary, combining traditionally shot interview footage with fake news footage from both the past and present, web camera footage, security camera footage, and even body cam footage. Assembling it all together with various set photos that are framed like crime scene photos to authentically convince you that these are a series of crimes that you are being shown from real crime scenes. And additionally, the film also does a great job selling the grotesque nature of the central serial killer, Mr. Shiny, as we see so many sequences in this movie of his victims in horrible, mutilated positions. Like, the makeup and gore effects in this film are absolutely spectacular. And there was hardly any moments where my immersion was broken. If there was, it was when my mind would stop to analyze how the makeup was done. And while staying on the subject of the film's realism, something I really love about the movie is how the film does reference real-world events. Like the fact that this movie references that there was a planetary alignment on May 13th, 2011, and emphasized how the killer, Mr. Shiny, would utilize that date to perform some sort of occult ritual. And there was actually a planetary alignment on May 13th, 2011. Like, the movie didn't have to do that. It could have just made up a date, but it didn't. It chose a real date, which shows attention to detail. And while on the subject of attention to detail, something I really love about this movie, and they don't shove it in your face, it's just something I knew. It's the fact that they tell you in the movie that Mr. Shiny committed like 3 murders in the mid-90s over the course of like 2 to 3 years, and then he took a long break and started committing more murders, leading up to a total of 13 kills for his ritual. That is consistent with real-world serial killers. And I know this because I was actually a big fan of true crime a couple years ago, and if you know true crime, then you would know that male serial killers, specifically male serial killers, will be active for about 2 to 3 years before taking a long break known as a cool-off period. And in that period, they may come back to commit more murders or they may not. But that's just a little detail that you would only know about if you were familiar with true crime. And they don't bring that point up in this movie, but that's accurate to real life, which I found incredibly impressive. Like, I could really gush about this movie all day, and obviously I am biased as well because this movie was recommended to me by its star, who I have worked with. But I really feel like this movie just does a lot of things really well, and it doesn't go out to reinvent the wheel. Beyond its premise of being a mockumentary, it's a pretty straightforward horror film, but it's executed very well. And a lot of elements of the movie, like the supernatural element, which would otherwise annoy me in an otherwise grounded film like this, are handled with a delicate touch. There's never a moment where the film pushes itself too far beyond its confines of what's expected of it. And I really respect that. It's not a perfect film. I do think a couple lines of dialogue leave something to be desired, like the line of dialogue near the end where it's like, I don't believe in any karmic crap, and it's like, no, it's cosmic. Like, I think that line is kind of dumb. But that's really just nitpicking. Like, this is a great film that has a unique presentation and great performances, particularly from Peter, as well as Travis Wolfe. I thought Travis Wolfe was great in this movie. And also, Strange Harvest might have the best line read I've heard in a movie all year, which comes from Jesse Clarkson's character, Mr. Shiny, where he just says, at the end of the movie,
It's gonna go on.
And you guys know me, I love little details, and a small detail that absolutely blew me away in this movie is that in one of the fake crime scene photos, you see a toxic Avenger action figure. Like a classic toxic Avenger action figure. Like, if nothing else was going to sell me on this film, that right there, that did. So go check out Strange Harvest. I rented it on YouTube. I think it's supposed to go up on streaming on, I think, Hulu in mid-February. Just go and support this movie. It's actually good. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't have a physical release. If it did, I would have bought it already. Next up, at number 2. It's always an interesting thing to see what they do with holiday-themed horror movies. And we haven't had one themed around Valentine's Day in a long time. But what can be said? I fell in love with Hard Eyes. Now, I'll be completely honest, while I do think Hard Eyes is a good movie, me ranking it so high really comes down to personal taste. Because, many people may not know this, I am an enormous fan of rom-coms. I'm a sappy, hopeless romantic that tries to hide that behind layers and layers of cynicism. But I just can't help it watching two conventionally attractive people get together based on contrivance after contrivance. It's absolute trash most of the time, but I love it so much. And something I adored about Hard Eyes was the fact that it was literally a rom-com slasher. They do literally every single trope that you can think of when it comes to rom-coms. You have the awkward meet cute at the coffee shop, you have the realization that both the man and woman work for the same company and somehow neither of them knew that, you have the dress-up montage, the impromptu date that goes awry, you have the little moment where the guy parts the girl's hair away from her face to reveal how pretty she is, you have the tragic breakup, you have the scene where one tries to chase down the other at the airport before they leave, and then you have the happily ever after with the kiss. It does every single rom-com trope, but there also just happens to be a masked killer chasing them the whole movie. And it is so good. And the movie is incredibly self-aware about what it's doing. And while there's a couple cringe moments here and there, the fact that it pulls off this gimmicky premise so well of being a rom-com slasher solidified it as one of my favorite films of the year. That, on top of the fact that it has amazing co-stars who have great chemistry with each other. The guy, Jay, being played by Mason Gooding, who's probably most famous for his roles in the recent Scream movies, Scream 5 and 6. and the girl Allie being played by Olivia Holt, who I actually grew up watching on TV in shows like Kickin' It, but who has recently started to become one of the new Scream Queens, starring in Totally Killer a couple years ago, and then going on to do this. I really like her and Gooding as a pair. I think they have great chemistry together, and I think the fact that both of them are modern horror actors help really sell the film, on top of how gorgeous they both are. And of course, I had to go out and buy Hard Eyes because I'm a sappy baby, and I'm going to put it next to my copy of My Bloody Valentine, which is a much less romantic movie. And when Valentine's Day comes around in a couple months, I'll be sticking this in my Blu-ray player and having a great time. Anyway, before we get to my number one pick, I do have some honorable mentions, as improbable as that is to believe. Like I said, I have been overall disappointed with the film quality this year, but there have been a couple diamonds in the rough here and there that have genuinely impressed me, and I think they're worth mentioning. So first up, we have Bring Her Back. Bring Her Back is the latest horror film from the Filippo brothers. They made Talk to Me a couple years ago, and they definitely take things a step farther with Bring Her Back, which is a deeply uncomfortable film. Like, this film is great, it has great performances, it tackles its central theme of grief really well, and it is so goddamn scary. But this movie does cross a few lines, and it does it artistically well. The film is shocking without necessarily feeling like things are done for shock value, but this is a movie that pretends that boundaries don't really exist. And on the one hand, I respect it, but on the other hand, it is a deeply upsetting film, and that is the only reason it didn't crack my top 10. Because while it is a film that I'd be happy to watch, it's not a film that I'd be happy to watch, if you catch my drift. Still, it's great, I'd recommend it. Predator Badlands, which is the 6th live-action, non-crossover Predator movie, and the 9th total film in the franchise. This is a franchise that a lot of people felt lost its luster in 2018 with the horrible Shane Black Predator film, and was also a franchise that I wasn't necessarily too invested in, especially after Prey, which I felt like was mostly just retreading old ground. But director Dan Trachtenberg genuinely surprised me, not only with a banger animated film like Predator Killer of Killers, which came out earlier this year, but following that up with an exploration of Predator culture that fans have been asking for literally decades now. Predator Badlands is exactly the kind of film that every Predator fan, myself included, has always wanted, being just a solo hunt following the Predator as the main character. And this would have been a super easy film to f*** up, because the last time we got a film with a premise similar to this was Alien vs. Predator Requiem, which was horrible, and also because this film insists on having a humanoid side character to comment on all the Predator's actions. That humanoid character being the android Thea, played by Ellie Fanning, who is a Weyland-Yutani synth, which also opens the door back up to Alien vs. Predator crossovers, which, like I just mentioned, don't have a great track record, because the second one sucks. The first one's kinda good, second one sucks. But no, not only is Predator Badlands a great movie, I would say that it is the third best Predator movie, right behind Predators and the original Predator. It does every single thing right, like the fact that the main Predator Deck looks weak is part of the storyline. He's the runt of the litter, so the film frames him as the underdog as he's trying to prove himself as a Yautja, as a real Predator. Meanwhile, the android character Thea is a genuinely charming presence in the story that actually elevates the film and really helps ground the Predator on a human level. Not to mention, it would have been super easy to f*** up a dynamic like the one Deck and Thea have, because a lesser writer would have just written her as a nagging wife. But she's not that. She's a genuinely supportive character that also has her own motivations, but does care for Deck enough to try to convince him and dissuade him from doing things that will get him killed. And the fact that she is a Weyland-Yutani synth actually helps to open up the world building of this film in a way that is not detrimental. Because framing the Weyland-Yutani Corporation as the antagonists of this film not only works to reintegrate the Predator franchise into the Alien franchise, but also shows how this world can be supported without the presence of xenomorphs. Not even Prometheus felt confident enough to do that, because they literally just tossed in a xenomorph called the Deacon at the very end of the movie, because it's like, oh, well, this is Alien, I guess. But no, Predator Badlands makes the best decisions for a film of its nature. An argument can be made that the front half of the film is a little too quick compared to the back half, but overall it's just a great film, and I'm hoping that Deck and his story continues in future films, because I love Deck. He's great. And as for Ellie Fanning, I sincerely hope that she and her character reappear in future movies, because I really liked Thea. And I thought Ellie Fanning did a great job playing her. Or should I say Ellie Fanny? Ah! I'm cringe. I'm so cringe. Chainsaw Man the movie. Reze arc. Now, I am a fan of the Chainsaw Man anime. I binged the whole thing a couple years ago when it was released, and it genuinely really impressed me. I think it's a very well-written series, and I'm deliberately not touching the manga because I want to see the way the anime pans out. But overall, I love the character of Denji. I love how the entire story is basically a deconstruction on traditional character arcs and motivation, and how Denji's just a simple teenage boy who wants a girlfriend and wants to be treated well because life has just not worked out for him and everyone has treated him like dirt his entire existence. And despite the fact that the show goes out of its way to be irreverent and tell you that you shouldn't take any of this seriously or invest yourself in it, you do get invested in it. Because Denji is a sympathetic and likable character, and his character story is really well expanded upon in this anime film, as he falls for a classic honeypot and gets manipulated by a girl who's seemingly exactly his type, only for it to be revealed that she never really liked him, which is something that a lot of guys, particularly teenage guys, go through at some point. It's a very heartfelt story, but it's also not a story that's skewed one-sided for the male perspective, as Reze's character obviously has a fair amount of agency in the story, and as it is eventually revealed that it wasn't all manipulation. There were feelings there. She does genuinely like Denji, and you can tell that there's some regret in her actions, which is interesting. On top of that, the movie also has stupendous animation, a great new song from Kenshi Yonozu. Like seriously, Iris Out is just an amazing pairing to kick back. And on top of all that, the movie literally has a Sharknado in it. Like an actual Sharknado. You have Chainsaw Man riding a shark into a tornado made of blood. That's f***ing legit. It's wicked as f***. It's just amazing. The Day the Earth Blew Up. A fully animated Looney Tunes movie that fully delivers on the classic tone of old Warner Brothers cartoons. Daffy Duck and Porky Pig are an amazing pairing in this movie. Their struggle and central conflict of being afraid that they're going to lose their house is just so painfully relatable to the modern age. But this movie, in addition to being topical in some ways, Boba Tea, also feels timeless as it just harkens back to classic Warner Brothers animation. You have classic animated gags, you have mixing of animated media that feels consistent with older Looney Tunes cartoons. The character designs are absolutely phenomenal, the two standouts being obviously the alien and the scientist. And on top of all that, the movie's funny. The movie's actually funny. It's not cringe and lazy the way Space Jam: A New Legacy was. It's actually funny and feels genuine and has a really good conclusion and reminds all of us that good animation does still exist. We just have to look for it. And lastly, we have Tron Ares. Now, hear me out. Just hear me out. Is Tron Ares a weird vanity project for its producer and star Jared Leto? Yes. Does the movie have too many characters that bog down the central story? Yes. Was the film directed by a cookie-cutter filmmaker who was only hired because he's easy to work with and doesn't make any scary creative decisions? Yes. All of these things are true. But it is also the case that outside of Predator Badlands, Tron Ares is the best franchise film of the year. It's better than all 4 of the superhero movies that came out this year. It's better than the 3 live-action remakes that came out this year. And despite the fact that I didn't see them, I am willing to bet that it is also better than franchise sequels like Karate Kid 6, Jurassic Park 7, and Mission Impossible 8. Now, Tron Ares is obviously not a perfect movie, putting aside the fact that it has a very controversial main actor. The film just doesn't have a distinct personality the same way Tron Legacy and the original Tron had. It doesn't really employ its central premise of bringing programs into the real world as effectively as it feels like it should, and it sets up way too many teases for a 4th film that we're very clearly not going to get now. But against my better judgment, I really enjoyed this movie. I was a big fan of Tron Legacy during my teen years, and even though I would have honestly preferred a direct sequel to that, it was really nice getting brought back into this world. I loved seeing all the classic references, like being brought back to the original grid, or seeing some of the original concept art from Sid Mead in Sam Flynn's office. The special effects were obviously on point, just like with the previous 2 Tron films. The soundtrack was amazing, just like the previous two Tron films. Not as good as Daft Punk, obviously, but Nine Inch Nails did a great job. And despite the fact that there's too many characters, all the actors do an amazing job. The three standouts obviously being Jared Leto, who, despite his problems, does give a great performance as the title character Ares, Greta Lee, who does a great job as Eve Kim, and Evan Peters as Julian Dillinger, who is really the standout in the movie. Like, he's just a delight every time you see him on screen. He is a great antagonist. And you know what, despite all the problems that Tron Ares has, it does have one thing that it distinctly improves upon compared to its predecessors, being that Tron Ares is the best paced Tron film. It's not too slow like the original Tron, and it's not too quick like Tron Legacy. It has just the right pace. So even though it's not as good as its predecessors, it has that going for it. And fingers crossed that Disney just sells the Tron franchise to someone else who actually knows what to do with it. And hopefully those people actually make the good decision of bringing back Joseph Kosinski to direct the film. Because obviously he made Tron Legacy, and if F1 the movie is any indication, he still knows how to direct a movie. So, yeah. Anyway, moving on to number 1, cue Mr. Shiny.
It's gonna go on.
My actual number 1 pick of 2025 is Sinners, directed by Ryan Coogler. Now, as soon as I saw Sinners, I knew that it would be my favorite film of the year. This is the first film that I bought physically this year. I made sure that the copy I got came with the adjusted aspect ratios. That way I could watch the film as intended. And this entire year, I looked around for just one film. One single film that could even rival Sinners in terms of quality. And I did not find a single goddamn one. Like, I know a lot of people would say, well, what about One Battle After Another? That movie was pretty great. It was well directed, well acted, had a great color palette, a great soundtrack, and it touched on a lot of interesting social political commentary that's relative to the modern world, blah, 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 blah. And to those people, I would say that a 2-hour and 40-minute movie that has a shitty first hour, and only the second act of the thing is good, is not the best film of the year. It didn't even crack my top 10, so you can consider it a dishonorable mention here. Sinners, on the other hand, is good all the way through, which is remarkable because it's a film that tricks you into thinking it's going to be one type of movie, only to switch it on you and have you realize that it's a different type of movie. And before anyone brings it up, yes, I know that the structure of this film is basically From Dusk Till Dawn. You have a couple criminal brothers who are going around, then they go to a nightclub in the middle of the night and they get attacked by vampires, yada yada yada. I realized that when I watched the movie in the theater. And no disrespect to Dusk Till Dawn, I love that movie, but Sinners is better. Sinners is a better movie. This movie is just so good in so many ways that I cannot even describe. The music is incredible. Ludwig Göransson, just great. The cinematography is incredible. That one scene with the past and future colliding in the club, just indescribable. And the way it's filmed is integrated so well with the setting. It's just great. The acting is incredible. Haley Steinfeld is great. Michael B. Jordan is great, playing two distinct twin characters. And Ryan Coogler made a really smart storytelling decision, separating both of them in the first act of the movie. But he also didn't need to do that, because they feel distinct enough from each other that they probably could have been on screen at the same time, and it wouldn't have hurt the film at all. It probably just would have been expensive because they would have had to keep doing the face replacement thing, which is also an amazing effect. The fact that you never noticed the face replacement with Michael B. Jordan's double, or the split screen effect that they would have had to use, or any of that. It's great. And you also have a great central performance from Miles Catan in his on-screen debut. This was his first film, and he does an amazing job as the character of Sammy. The film also has a great villain in the form of Remick, played by Jack O'Connell, who's just an amazing presence in the film. And Jack O'Connell does an amazing job, especially since he's not that well known of an actor. I mean, the last movie I saw him in was Money Monster with George Clooney back in 2016. And if I'm remembering correctly, that movie was directed by Jodie Foster. And it's a good film, and he does a good job in it. But I hadn't seen him in anything else. And he just does such a great job playing a very complex, interesting villain. And the writing for him is also very clever, as the allegory he's meant to represent isn't just racism, it transcends racism. Because his character is Irish, and the Irish were also a historically marginalized group in America. And while him trying to get into Smoke and Stack's club can be read as whites trying to invade black spaces, it also goes beyond that. It transcends above that, as Remick stresses in this film that he wants a union between black and white. And you believe that. Like, I don't know if Remick was lying or not in the movie, but I believe that he wants unity. I believe that he wants people of his own. And it's just so interesting. Like, Sinners was truly the sleeper hit of this year for me, and I really didn't think it would be. Like, I saw the trailers for it when it was coming out, and I was like, oh, I'll see it. But, like, I didn't think I'd love it this much, especially since I'm not really a big fan of Ryan Coogler. I mean, I think the first Creed is a great movie, but it's really just a retread of the original Rocky. And I think both of the Black Panther movies are mid. In fact, I actually think Wakanda Forever is better than the first Black Panther, but they're both kind of mid. So going into this movie, I didn't expect a lot, and it became my favorite film of the year. It is the best film of the year, period. Like, no one can convince me otherwise. Like, this movie is just so good in ways that transcend description. It is so good that even its flaws are its strengths. Like, for example, the villain Remick is really interesting, but he has a vague backstory. And while I was watching the movie, I thought to myself, man, I want to know more about where Remick came from, what his real motivations are, like how he became a vampire. But the fact that the movie doesn't give you that information also creates an aura of mystery around his character and makes you wonder, how straight is he being? Is he telling the truth, or does he just want a massive vampire clan? We don't know. There's a mystery surrounding his character that is not elaborated on, and it makes the film stronger because it forces you to think. There's also the scene at the end of the movie where Smoke smokes all the KKK members with his Tommy gun. And that scene feels gratuitous, it feels overly indulgent, but it doesn't derail the film. It's a nice bit of catharsis to the audience, and it feels like it's very much in the same vein as the church scene from the first Kingsman movie. Just a bit of satisfaction after a horrible series of events. But yeah, Sinners is just an amazing film. And even though I know Ryan Coogler has, like, no intention at all of making a sequel to this, I wouldn't mind seeing another movie that takes place in this world. I mean, I know that they'd probably f*** it up, but there's potential to build on this. But that's another great thing about Sinners, that this is a story that can and does work by itself. And that's all you can really ask for from any movie. Well, I guess it also would have been nice if Delroy Lindo's character said his famous line from Congo, but can't have it all.
Stop eating my sesame cake!
In any case, that was my top 10 favorite films of 2025. I hope you guys enjoyed my list. If there's any films that you think I missed out on this year, please feel free to let me know. Because obviously the whole concept behind my channel is looking at films that people haven't heard of. And considering how rough this year was, anything good would be appreciated. And like I said, my list is subject to change. So I would love to hear about any movies that I may have missed, or movies that I just didn't hear about. In any case, this is my final video of the year. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram and Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. I hope all of you have a happy new year, and I hope that 2026 is a much, much better year for movies. Fingers crossed. And I will see you all later.